Hi, and welcome back to Rediscovering RC, my personal journey as I venture back into the world of RC and RC racing after an almost 20-year hiatus. I'm your host Julio, and normally I would have been in the workshop recording this video this past weekend. However, it's been a busy couple of weeks, and I did get my Serpent X20 built. It's been a while now, so I wanted to go ahead and get this video out, and I figured, why not try a different format. So I'm going to be going over, bag by bag, some of the videos that I recorded while I was building, and I'll throw in some additional notes with regards to how the build went, any pitfalls I might have found, and so on. So enjoy. Hey everyone, so I'm just getting started with the X20 build. First note that I just want to share, and this comes by way of an excellent video that Jeff Hamon from Team Serpent put together with regards to building your diffs in general. So the diff bag is the first bag that you're going to start with. And one of the suggestions that he has, or actually a couple of suggestions that he has, is number one, with the gears, you want to go through all the gears and make sure that there's you get any flashing or anything you might want to have. So you might want to have a little hobby knife or something handy to be able to flash that. Optionally, you could just take the edge, and like how I did, in this case I'm using some 600 grit sandpaper, just slightly go around the edges, make sure you get anything that's left of those little burrs. I found on one of these, actually both of these, the big ring gears, I had to kind of shave down that side flash. And the other thing that he suggests is just flat on the table, which I did over here on the wood, plain on the wood surface. You don't want to do it on something like this because it won't be completely flat. What you want to do is just take the bottom side of the gear and just sand it just a little bit, just to get any mold flashing that might be visible here. So basically just clean up the edges. Kind of did the same flattening on the bottom here. Didn't really run into an issue with any flashing or anything on the smaller gears. These are all composite, so you really should go through that. The other thing that he suggests, with all these metal parts, you want to go through and clean them, either with like a mild bright cleaner, or in my case I'm just going to use some contact cleaner, which is basically the equivalent of like typical motor spray that you would use. So I mean, this is the approach that I took to clean all my parts on my TLR buggies, so I'm going to go ahead and clean those out, and then we'll move forward with the build. Alrighty, so I just completed the diff bag, put together the diff. Just a couple of notes. Do be sure when you're putting together the diffs, you want to use a little black grease or silicone oil, which is what Jeff Hamon recommends. I didn't have that, so just went with my TLR black grease here. You just want to coat the O-rings and then the entry of the the out drives here. Put them in. Again, as I mentioned, just clean off all of the rings with the contact cleaner. Follow the instructions. The only other tip Jeff recommends is when you're putting in the 4 little gears into the housing, put a little bit of oil on the outside before you put the plates in. That'll kind of helps lubricate it. At the same time, it just kind of helps keep the plates on while you're inserting it into the diff housing. As typical with a usual diff, you want to go ahead and tighten your screws in a cross pattern. And the kit comes with 7,000 CST oil, so that's what I got in there, and it feels pretty good. So on to the next bag. Okay, so after the differential bag, what you're going to have is you're going to have the solid front axle bag to build. This one's not too complicated, but a couple of caveats here. So basically you just put the ring gear for this ring here. You just want to go through and you want to sand the edge. There is a little bit of flashing here that I cleaned up again with the 600 grit sandpaper. The other side just snaps on, the other side of the pulley, so that's pretty straightforward. Now a couple of caveats here. Number one, you are going to be screwing metal into metal, so as usual you want to put a little drop of thread lock into these 3 screws that hold this pulley into the solid axle. The other thing, and the kind of tricky part of the build, is that there's 2 cross pins on each side, which is what holds the out drives in place. So as you can see, I'm holding it vertically because as soon as I move this, the pins may come out. So you'll want to hold this vertically. Eventually it's the bearings that are going to capture all those pins in place so that you don't lose them, but until that step comes, go ahead and keep this vertically, and I'm going to put it in here in my diff holder for the time being. And now that we're done with those 2, it's on to bag 1. Okay, so I've laid out all the parts here. I've got the hardware up here with a couple of looks like a little pair of shims here. You got the bearings and the balls here, and all the aluminum with the eccentric cams and the arms. So right off the bat, as you can see, I've got my sandpaper here. Oh, you also get a little tool for making adjustments, I think probably for the balls, but got my sandpaper here. One thing you're going to find right away is that you're going to want to clean up the flashing that's on the arms. In my case, what I found was flashing around the cups for the pivots and along the inside of this inner brace here. So on these, I just shaved off a little bit. It's on this inside part here. I shaved it off with a hobby knife and then finished it off with the sandpaper. You don't need to do too much. Well, I still feel a little here, so let me go ahead and finish it off. Just sand the inside a little bit of these sockets. This is kind of like seems like a fiber-filled composite material, so it's pretty hard, and even with this 600 grit sandpaper, it's coming off pretty quickly. So I really wouldn't recommend that you use anything tougher. You'll probably end up with like a rough surface afterwards. The 600 grit really does a good job of keeping it smooth. So yeah, it's basically on all four arms. You've got those, that flashing there that you'll want to take care of. The inside part here, just with the hobby knife, a couple of quick passes, and I was able to smooth that. No need to sand there. And that's pretty much it. You will notice off the bat, these are the fronts and these are the rears. The fronts do appear to be a little bit shorter, makes sense. But anyways, the next step now, I'll probably be going on, let's see, I gotta take a look at the manual, but now we'll start building up. Oh, the first step is gonna be the grub screws, so I'll have to figure out in terms front and rear and put them on one side. So that's what I'm gonna be working on next. Okay, so working on the suspension arms, we got the calipers out because part of the build-up on the arms is we insert the grub screws here, and the grub screws are used to set the droop. So as per the manual, we want 1.7 millimeters sticking out underneath. You put the grub screw in from the top, which is easy to see because the arms have the Serpent logo on what is supposed to be the top of the arms. So for the front suspension, you want the grub screws towards the front, and for the rear suspension, you want the grub screws towards the rear. Now these arms are designed to go either way on either side, so bilaterally they're equal. The front arms, as I mentioned earlier, are just a little bit shorter, so that's what differentiates the two. But in either case, I've got my grub screws installed and set as per the instructions. So the next step is we're going to be mounting them onto the chassis itself. And as from looking at the manual, I discovered that that's what this little tool is for, as this is what holds the balls in place while we screw them into the chassis. So on to the next step. Okay, so I've got the lower A arms installed on all 4 points. One of the things that you want to check, obviously, is to make sure your suspension is free. I do have one arm here that is giving me a little trouble, so I'll work on this to free it up. The other thing of note is that, wow, it was pretty difficult getting basically the ball joints mounted up on the chassis with this little wrench. It's a super thin little wrench. And considering that you have a 1 millimeter spacer underneath these, it kind of makes it a little difficult. The other thing that added to making it even more complicated was the fact that, for whatever reason, even though these are machined, the screws didn't quite go in cleanly. I mean, I contemplated using basically some thread lock on this because it is metal to metal contact. However, the thread itself, because I don't know, and the balls didn't seem to be clean, I was having trouble as it was. So obviously, getting all the arms mounted gave me a problem. Maybe that's part of the reason why this arm is a little bit binded. So I'll have to, again, take a look at this, try to get this freed up before I continue. So let's try to take care of that, and then I'll be moving on with the build. Okay, so something I wanted to clarify from that last segment is that with regards to the grub screws, they actually go inboard related to the arm. So basically on the front arms it goes on the rear part of the arm, and on the rear arm it goes on the front arm part of the arms, as you can see here in the pictures. Also with regards to the actual ball joints themselves, as you can see in this picture, I came to find out that they are actually keyed. So you can actually, instead of using that little wrench, you can actually capture it with a 3 millimeter wrench and then tighten down from the bottom. Now with the 1 millimeter spacer, that's the default setup, you will find that it gets really close there towards the end. So definitely use a regular 3 millimeter wrench and not a ball tip, because otherwise the screw, which is about 8 millimeters long, will pretty much push that wrench out. So remember, a non-ball 3mm wrench, and you should be good tightening it with that instead of that tiny little wrench that they provide you. Alrighty, so I'm just started on bag 2, taking all the parts out. I've separated all the metal parts from all the plastic parts. Again, as with the original arms, just want to go through and make sure that there isn't any flashing or anything like that. There's a little bit here, which I'm going to go ahead and take care of with a hobby knife here. And again, this is a pretty stiff composite, so I mean, just a little bit of scraping with the knife should do it. And once I do this, of course, I'm going to run the sandpaper on it a little bit. This is really so far the only significant flashing that I've seen. And a little bit here as well. You know, building a kit like this so far, it kind of makes me, you know, appreciate the effort that TLR puts into the parts, not only taking them out of the trees, but there's really little to no flashing at all on the TLR parts. So big shout out to them for that. So yeah, again, as usual, just go through these a little bit, sand these just to make sure they're smooth. Granted, these are the ends of the you know, the turnbuckles. This is for the rear suspension. Not really going to do anything, but it's always good to be thorough. Make sure that you're not going to have any slop or anything like that. So that one's done. And again with this one, and in this case I am using my finger. It's going to help, you know, this piece just to shape in there and smooth it out. So that's pretty much it. Also, you know, there were some parts that were on trees. Namely, these are like the little the little pills that go into these brackets for the upper arms, and then there's also the spacers, which is what allows you to get the I guess you can call it a camber for the rear. So anyways, yeah, clean those up a little bit, and now I'm ready to start building, so I'll be getting at it. Alrighty, so we just finished with bag 2. This basically completes the the whole rear suspension. The rear diff is installed, arms are installed. We've got basically our suspension. Just playing around with the cups that go on the outside of the pillow balls. I could probably just loosen them up a little bit, which basically with a 3mm driver, just got to go in here and just open it up a hair. And again, you just want to make sure that the pillow ball itself is not loose, which it's not. And you got some free, it should fall easily under its own weight. So this one's okay. This one was a little tight. Now that I loosened it a little bit, it's all right. So we're good to go and ready to go to bag 3. Alrighty, so just starting on bag 3, I have completed the turnbuckles, put in the ball links for the rear suspension, also the center mounting point for the rear suspension links. So part of that also has a little ball bearing for the belt to pass over. That's part of the assembly there. So basically, to make the turnbuckle assembly easier, I've got the Serpent 4.0 turnbuckle wrench and their Ballcup tool. This tool's a little old. You can just tell by the design compared to the newer line of Serpent tools, but it still works with the turnbuckles in this, with the Ballcups in this kit. So, following in line with the way I built my TLR car, basically the actual turnbuckle here, the adjustment part, has a little notch on the right side. That's the regular thread. So I'm going to put all of those on the right hand side for easy calibration on everything. So let's keep going. Okay, so actually we've completed what is bag 3, and in bag 3 again I put in the links, the toe links for the rear end. So the rear end is essentially done. Okay, and of course be careful when you're putting it in and make sure you get the links in between the belt. And for the front, we have now installed the front diff. The front diff, actually it's just basically it's just a solid axle. We've run the belt through. I've got this, the cam and the bearings. Again, remember that those cross pins were easy to fall out, and you had to hold that vertically. So while it was vertical, I put the bearings in that allowed me to come across. And I also installed the cams and dropped it into the carrier here. So that concludes bag 3, and I'm actually starting on bag 4. So here we go. Alright, so as a wrap up to bag 3, I just wanted to point out that it can be really easy to miss it in the manual. However, the manual does call out for the upper arms. One is a little bit shorter than the other one, and those arms are supposed to go in the rear. So you want to make sure that the shorter upper arms go in the rear and the ones that are slightly longer go in the front, as you can see here in the pictures that I have displayed. The only other significant notes, of course, is that those upper arms are spaced with shims, and they are composite shims. So like a lot of the other parts in the kit, you'll want to sand those down to flatten basically the ejection molding marks that are on those. And really, again, it's all about trying to get rid of that bind in the arms when you do that. So with bag 3 wrapped up, let's go ahead and continue with the videos. Okay, so I've completed bag 4 now. So basically that completes the front suspension. I'm already going to find a couple of things where I'm going to have to rebuild a little bit. Maybe not so much, but I definitely have one problem, and that is the outdrive from the solid axle that's on this side is very difficult for the dog bone to slide in and out. It's almost fixed in place. Now it can move, but depending on the angle though, it's getting hung up in the outdrive. So see there's an example where it gets hung up on the outdrive. So depending on where it spins, or where the outdrive is, it may or may not lock. So on this side I got a different problem, which really not so much a problem, but it's basically these little spacers, which is what gives you the caster angle in the front. I just got to do a little more sanding. So really one of the big things on this car so far is fit and finish. Compared to the experience that was the TLR car, there is a lot of little sanding and cutting flashing and things like that need to be done. On the rear end I had to do quite a bit of sanding on these spacers just to get the suspension to work freely, which it does. But in the front it looks like I'm going to have to do this. So already I'm probably looking at having to get at least another part, because I think just this outdrive just came bad with the kit. So other than that, it looks all right so far, working pretty freely. I mean, I'm still gonna have to these blocks here. I'll probably just have to square up when when other pieces get placed on them. So just to make sure that those are square and that everything's rolling freely. But I mean, it seems like it is now. So I'm gonna finish up tonight. It's getting late here, and I had a couple other things that I had to do during the day. So I'm just going to mount the mid motor mount and call it a day. So let me get up. Alright, so we've reached the end of day 1. I'm literally probably what you could say at the halfway point. Basically the entire, the suspension is done, the main chassis, that is. Okay, got the steering. Like I said, I've got a problem with this right front, with the dog bone getting hung up there in the outdrive. So, I mean, just based on how the other one feels, it's a problem with the outdrive itself. So I'll probably have to get a spare to replace that in the solid axle. As you can see, the only thing that I've really strayed from the kit is, rather than go with the kit spring, I've gone with an Axon gear, spur gear. Other than, I mean, really for nothing other than it looks pretty cool. So went ahead and changed that out, and that's it. I mean, overall, again, fit and finish has been something primarily, you do have to pay attention to the parts, clean up the flashing a little bit. Again, there's probably a little bit of sanding that I could probably do with these spacers just to free up this suspension a little bit. Other than that, I mean, it's as far as touring cars go, it's pretty decent. One final note for today that I didn't go ahead and do, I was about to, and that is, run a bead of glue along the line of this chassis. But I have to say, the finish on the side is really smooth. I mean, I remember the days where if you pass your fingers like this on the side of the chassis, you probably end up with little carbon fiber little splinters by doing that. But this is really finished well, especially on this surface here that's cut out. Feels really smooth. So I'm gonna go ahead and take a chance, not run a bead of super glue on it, and let's see how it goes over time. So anyways, that's day 1, and when I get started on this to continue this build, I'll go ahead and keep recording. So to wrap up the first part of this video, I thought I would just go ahead and explain a little bit about what was going on with the front end. I may have mentioned it in one of my previous videos, but I probably purchased one of the very first X20 kits that came to our shores. So being an early kid, you imagine there might be a few things, whatever, that they probably fixed in terms of part of the running production. But as far as the part that you see on the screen, this was the part that I was going to order, which is in the spares list for the X20. But then I noticed something when I looked at the optionals list, and that was that the part that I think I needed to replace was now listed as an optional, which is really the no blades version, because the dog bones were going directly into the blades. But then the one that's listed as a spare was the one that uses blades. So before the second part where I continued this build, it was actually about a week, I believe, before I started again. So I ordered some of these parts, and I decided to order the part that's listed as the spare. And while I was at it, I went ahead and ordered some extra blades, since I figured I was going to need the blades anyways for the front. And a couple of things came up with that. First off, that helped free the suspension quite a bit. Again, I had ended up having binding in the dog bones, and I was able to resolve that issue. The other issue that I came across once I had fixed that problem is that now with the blades and everything, it seemed like the dog bones were just going in a little bit too deep. So to resolve that issue, I just went ahead and said, well, I bought the the optional DJC's axles in the front with the new improved design, and also along with it the inner bearings that gives it a little bit more space inside the steering hub. So once I replaced all those parts, like, all my problems went away. So really, again, I have to appreciate Serpent that they've gone and made running changes. I don't know if like newer kits now come with the an extra set of blades and the out drives for the that are more open as opposed to the ones that are tightened up. I could have had just just an early part, a small defect there, which is again probably another running change that they might have fixed as well. So again, you see the evidence that at Serpent, they're coming out with new optional parts and improving things on the car after it's been released. So that's really a good sign, and I'm really happy with the way that the front end came out after all of that effort. I did have to do just a little bit more sanding on those spacers for the upper arms, and again, with regards to my mentioning fit and finish, again, it was things like that, like sanding down the spacers, cutting all the little pieces of flash. Again, nothing out of the ordinary for other TC kits that I've seen, the builds that I've seen online. And to be honest, the actual arms, like the arms going through the pin, none of that was a problem. It was really the little things, which once I finished doing that, the suspension was super free, and I was really happy with the result. So you'll probably see that, and there's a part in the video later where I mentioned that in part 2. But I just wanted to go ahead and wrap this up with that. I'm showing a couple of parts, just along with this video, just so you could see after I installed the blades and the front, DJC and everything. And again, I was really happy with the way everything, turned out. So I'll be following up with part 2 and the rest of this build along with my notes pretty soon. I'm here at the editing workstation, so I'll probably work on that and probably be just a day or two before I release the second part. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this, these build notes that I've shared so far. If you like this video, please smack that like button. I would really appreciate it. And if you like the kind of content that I'm putting out, please do me a favor and subscribe as well. Any and all feedback and the support is much appreciated. So until next time, I'm your host, Julio. Take care.